interesting view from the top. My guest today is a business leader who always stays ahead of the curve. He left a global position of managing assets worth $60 billion only to return to India and take on the mandate with a large conglomerate, the Aditya Birla Group, to turn around their financial services business. Ajay Srinivasan. He's perhaps one of the rare CEOs in the industry with experience of managing such huge portfolios across multiple verticals and multiple geographies. Ajay, thank you very much for joining us on NDTV.
Thank you, Marisha.
You were handpicked to turn around the business, which had a great start, but had somewhere started languishing. What were the challenges that you came with, and how's it been 2 years hence?
Well, let me start with the whole move to come back to India, because I think that's really the decision I took 2 years ago, and that's what set off this journey over the last 2 years. And I think that move from Hong Kong, where I was for 7 years, back to Bombay, was really driven by 3 factors. It was driven first by the India story, which I was more and more interested in, sitting in Hong Kong, watching the way India was developing. And I could see even 2 years back that the story was an India-China story that was emerging. So that was my first call. The second call was a call to get into financial services in a broader sense, because I really feel that the next 10 to 15 years is going to be a wonderful era of growth for financial services in a market like India. And the third was to come back to a group which is a household name in India, which opens so many doors. I think it just gave me a wonderful way to get into this market after being out of it for 7 years. I think the last 2 years have been very interesting in different ways. For one, I think we've had 2 very different years that I've been back home. I think the first year where everything was bullish and nothing could go wrong, and a second year where the world seemed to be at the edge of an abyss. So I think with those 2 contrasting years, it's been interesting to see how the business has grown. We've grown from 5 businesses, which I inherited when I came in 2 years ago, to now 7 businesses. We had about 2 million customers. We're now over 4.5 million customers. We had sales in a year, which we now do in a month. So I think in terms of the momentum and the pace of change, I think it's been quite an interesting and exciting time over the last 2 years.
Like you said, huge upside and then huge downside. But just put in perspective both the global and the domestic experience of working per se. What are the challenges between the 2, and what are the similarities or other differences also?
See, I think there are broadly the drivers of financial services in whichever market you work are not that different. I think they tend to be built around distribution, the kind of distribution you have, the kind of products that work in those markets, the attraction of a brand, the attraction and the ability to build a customer and operations framework that can support the business, and last, the people. So I think while those drivers don't change, I think although I worked in Asia and worked across 10 markets for 7 years, building businesses from ground up, I think the culture is really what makes the big difference in most of these markets. It's how do you work with people, what works in markets. So distribution varies from market to market, products vary from market to market, what drives people varies a little bit from market to market. So I guess that's really the experience and the excitement of the last 9 years that you just talked about.
You spoke about people. Now you're a man who's always best described as a person who's in a hurry. And the pace of growth, if you see for Aditya Birla's financial services group since you've joined, is grown by leaps and bounds. You've just enumerated some numbers for us. Yet that number 1 position deludes you. I'm sure you're not happy still.
Well, I take your point on speed. It's driven by a couple of things, really, from my perspective. I think the opportunity is so large, and when you deal with an opportunity of the scale and size that we have currently in the Indian financial services market, I think the excitement itself drives a certain level of pace, in me as an individual. The second area that I really put a lot of focus in, other than speed, because I believe speed is important, not haste. So I think I like to draw a distinction between the 2. It's important that people act quickly, but not in haste, not without thinking about what they're doing. But I think the second big area that I personally put a lot of focus on is the quality of execution. Because I've seen that people spend a lot of time thinking about what to do and how to do it, and you have to get that right as well. But I think it's important not to ponder too much on that and to make sure that the execution you get is equally good, because in my mind a lot of the differences in performance you see on the ground amongst several institutions is really driven by the quality of execution, not always by the kind of strategy that they've followed. So I really personally put a lot of focus in terms of both speed and in terms of quality of execution. As for the number 1 slot, we want to be a top 3 player in the businesses that we are in. We say our vision for our business is really built around 4 pillars. We want to be leaders in the businesses in which we operate. We want to be role models. So it's not just a unidimensional view of leadership. We want to make sure the way we run business, the kind of practices and processes we follow, really sets an example for the industry as a whole. Our third pillar for the vision we've set for our business is built around building broad-based businesses. Businesses that really provide a range of products and options for the customer groups that we cater to. And today, across our 7 businesses, we can really provide products. Other than banking products, we have the ability to provide any products to our customer group. And the last pillar for our vision is really around building all of this in an integrated fashion, because we believe if you do it in that way, then there are several benefits from doing that. So I think we're in early stages of putting all of this together. But I think if we get this right, then who knows where this will take us.
So what's the time frame? I'm sure you've set an internal deadline for yourself to be one amongst the top 3.
See, while I say I'm in a hurry, and I don't, I'm not ashamed to say that, I think businesses are really built over a period of time. You've got to make sure you get the foundation right. You've got to make sure you're putting the right basis for being able to build the business. And I think that's the way I look to do it. So we are in a hurry, but we need to put the foundation. We need to build the business. We need to build the building on top of the foundation as well. And as I say, I think if we do these things right, if we do what's right for our customers, if we do what's right for our employees, if we do what's right for our shareholders, we would have already done a very good job.
All right, talking about foundation, people are always, like you've mentioned earlier, for financial services, they're an important part of building a strong foundation. Now, mark of leadership is also when there's a change of guard, people stick around, people stick with you, and that's been characteristic of your movements, Ajay. What makes people stick to you?
Well, that's a question you should ask the people who work for me rather than me. But my people philosophy is really driven by a few things, and maybe I should just talk about that. I believe when I'm looking for people, one of the key things I look for is passion and commitment, because I think I can teach people, or people can learn a number of things, but they can't learn passion and commitment. So that's the first thing I look for people. Then I want to be able to provide an environment for these people which is very entrepreneurial in nature. I want them to feel that this is their own business, and that as senior leadership, we're providing them the tools and the environment in which they can prosper with this environmental mindset. I think that's a very second important piece that we do. And the third thing that personally I feel a job of a leader is very important is really looking at what you think the potential of the individual is. And often I find people don't recognize that potential themselves. And to be able to set a goal for that person where by stretching a little bit, and sometimes a little bit more than they expect, they can reach a goal that they never thought they could exist, that they could reach. And I think by doing that, you see a complete transformation in the individual, because they realize they've achieved something that they never thought possible themselves. And the success and the joy that comes from doing something like that is an exhilaration that creates momentum for many years to come.
What next in terms of business growth? You've done an acquisition, and you've also incubated a PE business. How do you want to take these two forward, and what are the next targets in areas of growth?
See, I think on the retail broking business that we acquired back in March of this year, we really acquired a platform that has about 200,000 customers, a distribution network of about 700 branches across the breadth of this country. I think it gives us a great platform to be able to build a wealth management and financial distribution model across the country. And I think there's significant growth opportunity in this on both counts, in terms of adding customers, in terms of selling more products through that distribution network. So these are early days. We've just been 6 months in the business. In fact, the business has had a very, very successful 6 months. The results have just been out recently. We've grown significantly over last year in terms of both revenue and in terms of profitability. In terms of the PE business, I think it fits very well with our overall scheme of businesses. It provides another product for our high net worth customer. And it provides a business that I think provides a number of linkages to several Aditya Birla Group companies and our operating experience that we have built. So we look to grow that business as well, greenfield. On the issue of acquisitions, I think we are always opportunistically looking for acquisitions. We think that there will be opportunities always in a market, and I think we might see some coming up over the next 2-3 years in all the businesses in which we operate. And I think you've got to opportunistically look at these acquisition opportunities by looking at really 2 filters. The first filter that we look at typically is a strategic filter. Does the business fit our strategic mold and what we want to do with the group as a whole? But then second is, does it really fit our financial measures and our financial metrics? And if it passes these 2, then we're more than open to look at acquisition. But we see there's opportunity to grow both organically and inorganically.
Right, all right. Shifting focus a little bit, you've just taken on as chairman of FBSP. look at the business that you are in right now is hugely dependent on the quality of distribution, agents rather, who distribute the product. There's a huge amount of illiteracy on the investor side, and there's also the agent who tends to mislead or maybe doesn't even understand himself what he's selling. How do you set that right?
See, I'm not going to correct your data, because I think when you talk about mis-selling, the numbers are typically very small, at least relative to the volumes of business that is being done today. But I think the overall issue is really one of financial literacy. And I think if this industry is going to grow to its true potential, if we are really going to convert money from savings and other forms of savings outside of banks into financial savings in the products that we represent, then I think financial literacy becomes very key to this industry and to us as a group. I think there are two bits to financial literacy. I think there is clearly the distributor or the intermediary who plays a very key role in this. That my role in FPSB clearly plays to that piece, which is really around how do you empower distributors to provide better advice to the customers that they're advising. Because at the moment, you have a mix of people. You have people who are really providing some good advice, but you have people who are pushing paper. And I don't think we should put the two necessarily in the same box. But I think it's equally important for individuals, customers, investors to also improve their awareness of the products they're buying. And I think that's something again that'll take a bit of time. I think there's a fair amount of work already going on in terms of increasing awareness from a customer viewpoint. But I think it's important that both people take the responsibility to improve their literacy, if you like, or their awareness. Because I think only with that will people take better decisions going forward. And that's the most important thing for financial freedom for any individual.
All right, interesting thoughts there. We'll take a quick break and we'll come back, Ajay, to grill you on, of course, India as a story and what you make of the markets. You're watching View from the Top, and I'm with Ajay Srinivasan in a chat, and next I'm going to move to the markets. Ajay, the current bull run, I mean, it's a complete turnaround. Is it backed by solid fundamentals, or are you beginning to see froth build in?
Well, I think as many people have been saying over the course of the last 2-3 months, I think there's a lot of liquidity in the system. And I think a lot of the valuations and asset prices that you're seeing today are clearly driven by that liquidity, both domestically as well as internationally, because I think you are seeing increased flows from outside of India. Having said that, I think the fundamentals are not as bad as they were a year ago. I think if you look at, whether you look at industrial production, whether you look at the way autos are doing, the way cement is doing, the way several other core industries are doing, I think there is clearly sign of improvement over the course of this last 6 months. I think also you will see earnings upgrades as we go into the second half of this year. And I think when earnings upgrades kind of happen, you'll start seeing valuations look very different. Having said all of that, I still think markets are probably at are testing fair value at where they stand today.
Mm-hmm. Between domestic consumption or a global play, what would you pick?
Oh, domestic consumption any day. I think that is a big advantage of India. I think that's the true India story. So much of domestic-led stories. I think anything with a view outside of India, I would be a little less optimistic about, because I still think the US, Europe, and some of the developed world is going to take a little bit of time to get back into the days that they were in 2 years ago.
Right. So 21,000 in this financial year, is that a target that we could aim for or look for, looking at the fundamentals and the earning upgrades that we expect, or do you think there'll be several hiccups before we reach that figure?
I don't know what the level will be, Manisha, but I'm quite bullish on equities generally, because I think the environment is clearly, there are three things that will drive it. There's going to be sentiment, there's going to be earnings, there's going to be liquidity. I think sentiment is clearly changed already. You can see sentiment clearly, everywhere we go, we're looking at people looking much more positively at the stock market and at the world around them. I think earnings upgrades are already coming around, and I think you can see that in the way the last quarter earnings have come through. And the liquidity story we've already talked about. So with those three drivers working the way they are, I think you should see continued bullishness in the markets.
All right, lots of money flowing into emerging markets. There's actually a huge shift in large global funds focus. Yeah. Instead of 15%, now almost 25% of their fund is dedicated to emerging markets. How would you place India amongst the rest?
See, I think the overall flows are really driven by a few things. I think it's driven firstly by a view on currencies. And the general view is that currencies like the Indian currency are likely to appreciate. That's always a good thing for flows. I think it's driven by the generally low level of interest rates in many of the markets around the world. And as I said earlier, the growing risk appetite for investors. So that's the environment under which we are operating. In that environment, I think India has several benefits because, as I said earlier, I think the India consumption story, the India domestic story, and you can take this in terms of whether it's the question of any consumption good which caters to the billion population in India, or it caters to the infrastructure needs of India and the $550 billion of infrastructure spend that is required over the next 5-year plan period. I think each of these things is quite unique to an India story. And I think India has traditionally been under-owned in foreign portfolios. So I think you will continue to see, therefore, that interest in India and money coming back into this market.
Let's give an estimate. If it's a long-term investor looking at Indian equities over a 3 to 5 year period, what's the average return that he or she can expect?
I think given that's typically a function of what alternate assets would give them. I think in the current market, I think if somebody got 15% in a market like India, they should be very happy.
All right, so 15% plus in India. What could derail the India growth story? Are there is there anything that worries you?
I think there are 2 or 3 things that I would say we need to keep on the watch list. I think the one issue that many people talk about is the whole security environment. We are in a neighborhood which is not necessarily always stable, and I think that security environment is something that is something that's always worth keeping a watch on. I think the second thing is that we should generally look at, given the liquidity has driven asset prices to where they are, I think just keeping a watch on global liquidity and what the central banks do when central banks start actually tightening their belts, who starts, and where the story will, how they engineer a slowdown, how they engineer the tightening of interest rates. I think that will be the second thing to look for.
All right, we'll take a quick break, Ajay. We'll come back to grill you on a little bit of what Ajay is all about and what does he do in his free time, if he has any of that at all. Keep watching. We'll be back. We're in conversation with Ajay Srinivasan. Welcome back. I'm in conversation with Ajay Srinivasan, CEO of Aditya Birla Financial Services Group. Ajay, I'm going to shift gears a bit and talk about Ajay as a person. Do you get time to do anything outside of work? I mean, with all this vision of taking the group to become one of the top 3, is there time to do anything outside?
I do, and I believe very strongly that you need to be able to develop an all-round personality for myself and for my team. I constantly tell my people, you need to work hard, but equally you need to play hard, because I think you can't have a unidimensional.
What do you play?
So I play golf. That's my current passion. I used to play cricket. I was very passionate about cricket. Played a lot of cricket in India. Played in Hong Kong.
But the shift to golf is because there's so many more big deals that you can do on the golf course.
No, it's just old age, I guess, Manisha. There's nothing else. I think golf is a game I can kind of adjust. I can play 9 holes. I can play it anywhere in the world. I couldn't play cricket everywhere I traveled. So I enjoy going and traveling the world. That's another passion of mine. I love to travel. So if I can travel and play golf together, then that's a wonderful combination.
And how's family time spent?
Family time is spent with, I have 2 children and a wife, and we spend a lot of time together. I think that's very important for me. I think family grounds you, and I think family ultimately is the most important part of one's life.
So when you finally exit, do you have a retirement plan very close in mind, or you want to continue working for many, many more years?
No, I mean, I think I really enjoy work. Work for me is a passion. It's a mission for me. So I don't treat it as anything other than that. And I think when you have something like that, then you really don't think about ending it. You think about how can I make this go, and where will this morph into, and what would it look like.
So hanging up your boots is not in the horizon at all.
No.
So let me ask you through another interesting question. What do you think everybody who works with you thinks about you?
I wish I knew, and probably maybe it's a good thing I don't know.
All right. What is a personal vision and a personal goal you have for yourself beyond work? What is it that makes you tick, and what is it that you would like to achieve?
I think when you're talking about achievement, I'm presuming you're talking about in my work life, because I think what I'd like to really do is to build an institution, I think, that can really deliver the potential and the promise that I think exists in the country in which I'm working, in the industry in which I'm working. I think there's a wonderful opportunity today. There's almost a blank sheet of paper for somebody to come and draw a vision and make that vision come true. And I think I'm very fortunate in the way I am to be able to be in this position where I can actually make that vision kind of come real. So that's really what I'm driven by, to see this vision, to draw it on a piece of paper, to get a bunch of people to join me in this vision, to make this dream come true. Because I think if we can all make that happen together, I think who knows, we could create not just an Indian institution of some pedigree and substance, but even a global institution of some materiality.
So global ambitions. We'll end with that. Ajay Srinivasan, thank you very much for joining us on NDTV. Pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much.